Blackbeard has a new bounty, and much like him, it's pretty damn big. 3,996,000,000 berries worth of big, which in terms of the Emperor numeric nuisance ranking scale, plonks him just behind Shanks to claim the title of sloppy second. My question is, why? The last time Blackbeard had a bounty update was 4 years ago in 2018, and that was when he was around 2.2 billion. Yeah, there were other numbers, but I don't care to remember them. But in terms of in-world time, that was only a couple of weeks ago. So what did Blackbeard do in such a short time to acquire such a drastic increase? Because as far as we're aware, all he did was sit and chill for a bit, murder an invisible man, and then decide to go after Boa Hancock. So it does feel right for him to get a new bounty after these 4 years, and it feels even more right that it's higher than Luffy's. I just want to know what he did to warrant that increase. Speaking of increases though, for every new subscriber to Grand Line Review in the month of September, we will be donating 10 cents to Gamers Outreach, an organization that supplies children's hospitals with gaming carts to give kids the power to play. There are 2 ways to contribute. Either you can hit the subscribe button, you can do that. There are 2 ways for you to contribute. You could hit the subscribe button, or we also have a direct donation page. And we are so close to hitting our next milestone, so if you do have the means, then any amount would make a world of difference to these kids. Alright, back to fictional pirates. This chapter is absolutely insane. And it's just fantastic to be back in the thick of One Piece, and this conflict on Amazon Lily was one of the most exciting that I've seen in quite some time. And I think that's purely because of the characters involved. When it comes to stuff like the raid, I don't really have any fear, because I have as much faith in the Straw Hats as I do in a thirsty, hormone-riddled teenager when it comes to ultimately pulling it off. But you take Koby, you take Boa Hancock, you have a big old Blackbeard, you shove them together, and I don't know what's gonna happen. I had no idea which way this was going to go, and that was very exciting. So I was on the edge of my seat with a lot of this, and as much as we need to dive into Hancock and Blackbeard, I actually think my favorite character of the chapter was Koby. He's been a very, and I mean very, slow burn, but watching him gradually climb to prominence is fantastic. I mean, he still doesn't have the power, but that's not stopping him from getting in between a warlord and an emperor. His bravery and sense of duty are so strong that I think this may be his finest moment since standing up to Akainu at Marineford. And it really does make me believe that he is going to end the series as a Garp-style character, becoming the new hero of the Marines. Which, to be fair, he kind of is already. Koby is known as the hero of the Rocky Port incident. Oh, and actually, this is speaking of. Koby was the gateway to a huge lore drop here, as his actions somehow assisted Mr. Blackbeard in defeating Ochoku. Now, if you don't remember who that is, look, I don't blame you. This character has literally only ever been mentioned once, but Ochoku was a member of the Rocks Pirates, one of our 2 mystery members actually, alongside Silver Axe. And intriguingly, Ochoku was the one who inherited control of Hachinosu after the Rocks Pirates were obliterated. My running idea was that Whitebeard took command of the island because I guess it just made sense for Blackbeard to inherit Whitebeard's territory. And maybe that was still the case. Maybe Whitebeard had it, then Whitebeard didn't have it because he died. Ochoku came in and said, ho ho ho, I don't know if that's how he talks, but he took the island, and then Blackbeard came along and took it from him. But yeah, all this time, there was another insanely powerful pirate legend dude active in this world. And I actually think that this is a first for One Piece. I dare say this is the first time that a character was introduced off screen and has also been defeated off screen. This is a new achievement. So I don't know if we'll ever see Ochoku in any way, but rest assured, at one point he was indeed there. But back to our young Marine, this chapter makes me want an entire series just following Koby's journey and seeing his side of the story. Also, it's hard to tell, but it looks like Koby might be immune to Boa Hancock's powers, which is impressive because even Vice Admiral Yamakaji got caught up and petrified by the feelings of his raging Marine peen. And this chapter was great in expanding upon Hancock's powers in general. She is consistently the most underrated warlord in my opinion, even more so than Moria. However, to be fair, I think a lot of that has to do with how Oda writes her, and in particular the whole character quirk of always being in love with Luffy, which seems to take precedence over, well, anything else. Although that was actually kind of funny in this chapter, because there was a panel where Koby and friends of Koby were marching on Hancock's palace and they just saw this gigantic picture of Luffy. But I'm glad that Hancock's true threat is being displayed here, and we even get a bounty update for our pirate empress, as she is now worth 1,659,000,000 berries. So if you count Luffy, Law, and Kid as a tie, then that currently puts Hancock in the top 10 highest bounties in One Piece. And not only that, but the Meru no Mi got some pretty solid respect in 1059, with it being Blackbeard's goal and everything. That was unexpected. Not so much the idea of going after a devil fruit, but going after this specific devil fruit. And I'm kind of sad that he didn't get it, because just imagine all of the Meru goodness that we've now missed out on. It's interesting because it's hard to gauge the importance of the fruit in Blackbeard's ultimate plan. Like, did he just go after it to take the opportunity, or is it the key to something more? I'm actually going to be making a whole video about how the Meru no Mi plays into Blackbeard's ambition, so I won't get too deeply into it here, but it presents a potentially pretty damn incredible twist on where we thought we were going. But this chapter is just packed with so much, and I haven't even touched on Rayleigh or the Seraphim yet. The Seraphim are one of the most unexpected things I think I've ever encountered in One Piece, and just thinking about how they were constructed kind of breaks my mind brain. But conceptually, they do make a lot of thematic sense, because the Seraphim are angels who surround the god guy and carry out the Lord's various decrees such as purification, which is the kind religious way of saying mass murder. So these agents actually fit quite well as the emissaries of the world nobles, who of course believe they are gods. And I guess we now know why Fujitora was so confident that they wouldn't need the warlords anymore, because we're pretty much just replacing them one-to-one, except with upgraded, smaller and sleeker models. Alright though, let us attempt to break down what these things are, because it is not simple. Obviously they take the appearance of the Lunarians, they've got the white hair, they got the black wings, they got the fire, and the brown skin. But is that just an aesthetic choice, or is there actual Lunarian DNA here? Casting our minds back to one Bartholomew Kuma, Vegapunk's MO here was to start with an organic being and gradually hollow him out, probably with an ice cream scoop, into some sort of programmable cyborg man. And I would very much suspect that the original Pacifista were all cloned Kumas who were also similarly hollowed out. So my first thought as to what happened here is that somehow Vegapunk has collected DNA from all of the warlords, probably very sneakily during their visits with the world government. But in addition to this, he has also collected samples from King, who was briefly imprisoned on Punk Hazard, where Vegapunk was of course stationed. So you take your warlord of choice, you then take your Lunaria and you smush them both together. And you take that new life form, you then gut them like a fish, insert all sorts of roboparts, and bam, you have a loyal legion of lab-bred cyborg children things. And I'm very curious about whether or not the Seraphim are going to stay in child form, or if they'll eventually grow up into full-on adult warlord clones. I mean, it's fictional science, so anything's possible. But more importantly, I want to know how many there are. Assumedly, all of the warlords are being subject to this treatment, so does that mean that there is a Buggy Seraph floating around as well? And if so, is he either phenomenally strong, or just like Buggy in real life, a bit of a joke and a general disappointment? But this goes much further, because surely there would also be a Jinbei Seraph out there as well. And in fact, even Blackbeard if Vegapunk had the time to take his DNA. And according to the very first Google result I stumbled upon, which should always be trusted, there are traditionally 7 Seraphim. So we could just be looking at a roster of the original 7 warlords, which would be fun because that includes Mr. Crocodile. Another big question is Haki. We've made a bit of a big deal about Haki for the last decade or so. So does Vegapunk science have a counter to Haki? Or because they're somewhat organic beings, can they actually tap into Haki themselves with their non-existent willpower? I think I may have just answered that one. But questions! So many questions. I really enjoyed this revelation though. At first, I wasn't so sure about these floating cherub warlords. All of a sudden, One Piece was going through a strong renaissance period. But the more I think about it, the more invested I become in their existence. Because they just bring up so much to think about in regards to potential future scenarios. Like, how does Mihawk react to seeing his child Lunarian clone? Or even better, how would Zoro react to seeing that? Would he just be like, yeah, this is a good test? And I mean, there's also something really sick and sinister about sending the Hancock Seraph to Amazon Lily. With that said, this whole 3-way conflict was fantastic. I feel like we very rarely get to see triple faction action in One Piece, and Oda conducted it masterfully in 1059. There was chaos, there was tension, there was crazy action, and Oda wrapped it all up quite neatly in a single chapter. And to cap it all off was the arrival of the Dark King himself. Rayleigh took a page from the Book of Shanks and decided to stop the war, although I suppose you could also argue that Shanks was borrowing from the Book of Rayleigh. And the reactions to Rayleigh's arrival, well, they were just great, because they mirrored my inner reaction. Kobe doing the eye pop and Blackbeard soiling his frilly baggy pants. I especially love seeing Blackbeard scared, because it's not something we generally get from an antagonist of his caliber. Like, I can't imagine Kaido, Big Mom, or Whitebeard having this reaction to Rayleigh. It reminds me that Blackbeard is different. He's sinister, he's intelligent, he's a big threat, but he's vulnerable. And I think that's going to be very important for the future of the series. series, because I don't think we should go down the road of another immortal style opponent like Kaido again. I also loved Rayleigh's bluntness towards Teach with his whole, I don't like you now, kindly go away, cherry pie man. Meanwhile, we've also finally solved the Shaki mystery. People have suspected this for a bit of a while, but she has been confirmed as a former Amazon Lily Empress. And if I had to say, I would guess that the order went Elder Nyon, then Shaki, then Nyon again, when Shaki abdicated for reasons we don't know, and finally, Boa Hancock. So Nyon had to take the mantle up again, kind of like a Naruto Hokage situation. And I don't know if this makes it more or less likely that Shaki was a member of the Rocks Pirates. That's also a very popular thought that I don't know where I stand on. But at the very least, it does make Rayleigh's connection to Amazon Lily that much more solid. They trust him because their former empress said, hey, we can trust this dude. But this chapter actually began with some scenes that I really needed. Although I would personally say that they may have been a little bit too little too late. Starting with what I did like, Shanks and Marco. Superb interaction, and I actually think it's kind of sad that Marco didn't take up the offer to join. But then again, if he did, he'd ruin the whole no devil fruit streak that the red hair pirates have going on, so you know what, fly away birdie, fly. What I enjoyed seeing most though was the short flashback of Marco interacting with Luffy, because holy crap, I was so bitter that these two never interacted during the Wano arc. When Wano ended, I was like, what are you doing? Marco has such a strong connection to Ace. How can those two not get a moment? So they do have that now, and that's great, but I don't know. There's something weird about getting a Wano flashback after the Wano arc has ended, because I think that this stuff just should have been in the actual arc. And the same thing applies to Yamato, but on an even larger scale, because I think this chapter gave Yamato very, very solid reasoning for staying behind. Much like we all proposed, it was an epiphany after encountering Green Bull, and the realization that Wano needed protection, whilst Momonosuke grew into his role as Shogun. Perfectly acceptable reasoning, I buy it 100%. But this order of events is just kind of baffling. It's almost like Oda realized he made a mistake with the very swift Wano ending and built this in as a sort of fix-up. The most generous argument I can come up with is that us as readers knowing this beforehand would have undermined the impact of Momonosuke's goodbye, because we would know that Yamato is effectively staying behind to babysit him. But the thing is, we know that now anyway. So what was the point? And I would much rather not have had that weird Yamato disconnect moment. It's just clunky. All of this, Yamato and Marco should have been part of the actual Wano arc, even if it was just one more chapter to breathe and let these things play out. Then we switch focus. Because the last thing I was anticipating discussing in 1059 was Yamato. I thought we'd moved on. And I'm glad that we did flesh out that decision. I think it makes it more retrospectively acceptable. But the mistake in flow has already been made. And I'll actually be keen to see if the anime decides to change the order of these events. Just like I'm keen to see you in this next video, because it's fun and such, and just click it, because why not?